In the year 2000, Enron Corporation was worth $68 billion. It was named America's most innovative company by Fortune magazine for 6 consecutive years in a row. Not once, not twice, 6 times. Its stock sat at $90 a share. Its headquarters in Houston, Texas, was a gleaming 33-story tower of glass and polished granite on Smith Street. The kind of building that announces to everyone walking past it that the people inside have already won. The lobby had an enormous rotating globe. The trading floor hummed 24 hours a day with the sound of screens and keyboards and the low voltage of people who genuinely believed they were changing the world. And then, in less than 12 months, every single dollar of that $68 billion vanished. Not slowly, not painfully over years of quiet decline. It evaporated with a speed that Wall Street had never seen before and has rarely seen since. The speed of it alone should terrify you. But what is even more terrifying is that Enron didn't simply fail. Enron engineered its own destruction, and then hid the blueprints inside the very financial statements that were supposed to prove how healthy it was. Most people remember Enron as a corruption scandal, a story of greed, fraud, and executives eventually going to prison in expensive suits. And while all of that is true, that framing fundamentally undersells what actually happened inside that building. Because Enron wasn't just a company that cheated. Enron was a company that invented entirely new methods of financial deception. Instruments so sophisticated, so layered in legal complexity and deliberate obscurity, that the credentialed accountants reviewing them couldn't fully explain what they were looking at. The auditors signed off anyway. The analysts issued buy ratings anyway. Wall Street applauded anyway. CNBC ran segments about Enron's brilliance. Business school professors cited it as a model of modern corporate innovation, and Enron's leadership stood at polished podiums before packed rooms of investors and told the world, with total confidence, that they had cracked the code of modern capitalism. The real question isn't why Enron fell. The real question is how something this rotten, this hollow at its core, held together for as long as it did, and who exactly, at every level, allowed it to keep standing. To understand the collapse, you have to go back to the beginning, before the scandal, before the fraud, before the famous documentary and the congressional hearings. Back to 1985, when a small natural gas pipeline company called Houston Natural Gas merged with another pipeline company called Internorth and produced something nobody anticipated: genuine ambition. The merged entity was named Enron. In the early years, it operated the way most pipeline companies operated: predictably, quietly, profitably in a modest way. You moved gas from one place to another through steel pipes buried underground. You charged a regulated fee. You reported steady earnings. You went home. That was the entire business model. Unglamorous, yes. Dependable, absolutely. And then, in 1990, the company's CEO, Kenneth Lay, a soft-spoken economist from Missouri who had spent his career navigating energy regulation, hired a consultant named Jeffrey Skilling from McKinsey & Company. And the word boring ceased to exist inside that building forever. Skilling was 37 years old, Harvard MBA with distinction, sharp-jawed and certain in the way that only the truly convinced can be. He had an idea so radical, so fundamentally different from how pipeline companies thought about themselves, that Lay hesitated before signing the offer letter. Skilling wanted Enron to stop thinking of itself as a pipeline company entirely. He wanted it to become a gas bank. Instead of simply moving natural gas from wellhead to customer, Enron would buy gas from producers at negotiated prices, lock in guaranteed prices for industrial buyers, and profit from the spread in between, functioning essentially as the financial intermediary for an entire commodity market. It was called the gas bank. The concept required nerve and capital, and a willingness to operate in spaces where the rules hadn't fully been written yet. It worked. Within 2 years, the gas bank was generating hundreds of millions of dollars in profit. Skilling's instinct had been spectacularly correct. And that early, undeniable success planted something quietly dangerous deep inside Enron's culture. The absolute conviction that the ordinary rules of business did not apply to them. They were smarter. They moved faster. They saw things others couldn't see. They were, in the phrase that would later title a documentary about their downfall, the smartest guys in the room.
By the mid-1990s, Enron had flung itself outward from natural gas into electricity trading, water utilities, broadband internet infrastructure, and even something called weather derivatives, financial instruments that allowed airlines, farmers, and utilities to hedge against the economic consequences of unusual weather patterns. The portfolio was staggering in its ambition, breathtaking in its velocity. Annual revenue climbed from roughly $10 billion in 1996 to more than $100 billion by the year 2000. $100 billion in reported revenue made Enron the seventh largest company in the United States by that single metric. Analysts at Goldman Sachs and Merrill Lynch couldn't stop upgrading their price targets. The business press wrote breathless, admiring profiles. Skilling appeared on magazine covers. Employees were given stock options instead of salary increases, and nobody complained, because the stock kept climbing and the options kept multiplying. But underneath that extraordinary revenue figure was a structural problem so severe and so deliberately concealed that almost nobody on the outside had any idea it existed. Most of that money wasn't real, not in any meaningful traditional sense of the word. Here is where the story becomes technically intricate, but it matters, because this mechanism explains everything that followed. Enron used an accounting method called mark-to-market accounting, formally approved by the Securities and Exchange Commission in 1992, specifically for Enron's application. Mark-to-market allowed the company to record the estimated future profits of a long-term deal the moment that deal was signed, not when the cash actually arrived over the life of the contract, but the instant the contract existed on paper. If Enron signed a 20-year broadband services agreement worth an estimated $500 million in future profits, it could book all $500 million today. Skilling understood the leverage in this method with surgical clarity. He applied it everywhere, relentlessly, to contracts of every kind, including speculative ones with wildly optimistic assumptions embedded in the projections. Because Enron was signing enormous, complex deals at a furious pace across dozens of markets simultaneously, the reported profits on paper just kept climbing. The stock kept rising. Bonuses flowed to traders and executives in volumes that staggered even by Wall Street standards. One trader in his late 20s cleared $8 million in a single year. But the actual cash, the tangible money that should have been backing those reported paper gains, was not there. Enron was booking tomorrow's earnings to cover today's reality, and the gap between the two was widening every single quarter with the momentum of a slow avalanche. To hide that gap, Enron needed a different kind of architecture.
And they found its architect in Andrew Fastow, the company's chief financial officer, a slight, intense man from New Jersey who understood complex financial structures the way a skilled surgeon understands anatomy. With cold precision, full command of every layer, and absolutely no hesitation when it came time to cut. Fastow built what became known as Special Purpose Entities, abbreviated as SPEs. These were legally separate companies, shell entities effectively, created by Enron, capitalized through labyrinthine webs of partnerships and outside investors, specifically engineered to absorb the debt and the deteriorating assets that Enron needed to keep off its own balance sheet. They had names like LJM Cayman, LJM2 Co-Investment, and Chuco Investments, the last one named with a kind of breathtaking absurdity after Chewbacca from Star Wars.
Fastow personally managed several of these entities, which meant he was simultaneously serving as the CFO of Enron and as the counterparty manager of the outside companies doing financial transactions with Enron. He was both sides of the deal. He was buyer and seller, debtor and creditor, insider and supposedly independent partner, all at once. Enron's board of directors was informed of this arrangement. They waived the company's own conflict of interest policy, not once, twice. Fastow personally extracted at least $30 million from these structures. The board, in its official minutes, commended him for his financial creativity and his contribution to the company's strategic objectives. What makes the Enron story uniquely and specifically dark is not simply that insiders knew what was happening.
It is how many people outside the company, people whose entire professional purpose was to catch exactly this kind of thing, should have known and didn't, or did know and looked away. Arthur Andersen, one of the 5 most prestigious accounting firms in the world, was Enron's external auditor. They reviewed the financial statements. They tested the controls. They signed the audit opinions that told the investing public the books were clean. They were paid $52 million by Enron in the year 2000 alone, $25 million for the actual audit work, and $27 million for consulting services on the same structures they were simultaneously supposed to be independently evaluating. That ratio is not an accident. It is a description of a relationship.
Andersen had a profound and growing financial incentive to keep Enron satisfied. And when serious internal questions arose within the firm about certain accounting treatments, particularly around the SPE structures and the mark-to-market assumptions, the voices raising those concerns were consistently overruled by the partners managing the Enron account. After the collapse, it emerged that Andersen employees in Houston had shredded documents by the physical boxload in what became one of the most notorious acts of evidence destruction in American legal history. The Justice Department indicted the firm itself. Arthur Andersen, founded in 1913, one of the oldest and most recognized names in American professional services, ceased to exist as a functioning organization within a year of Enron's fall.
85,000 people worldwide lost their jobs, not because they had done anything wrong, but because the culture at the top had made a series of choices that ultimately consumed the entire institution. But the person who saw the danger most clearly, the person who documented it in plain language, who put the warning in writing and handed it directly to the man at the top, was Sharon Watkins. She was a vice president in Enron's corporate development group, an accountant by training, calm and methodical by disposition. In August of 2001, while the stock was already sliding from its $90 peak and internal whispers were growing louder, she wrote a now famous memorandum to Kenneth Lay. 6 pages, single-spaced, specific, and unambiguous in a way that almost no internal document of that kind ever is. "I am incredibly nervous," she wrote, "that we will implode in a wave of accounting scandals." She named the specific vehicles: Raptor, LJM, Condor. She described the specific risks in language a non-accountant could understand. She told Lay that the accounting was deeply questionable, that the debt was real regardless of where it was housed, that the entire structure was visible and fragile, and that sophisticated analysts on the outside were already starting to ask the right questions. Lay's response was to commission an internal review, conducted by the law firm of Vinson and Elkins, which was also Enron's primary outside legal counsel, which had helped draft many of the very agreements being questioned. The review concluded the accounting was, quote, creative, but probably legal. Watkins was quietly moved to a lesser position. Her memo was filed, and Enron's stock, which had been drifting downward through the summer, accelerated its descent through the fall of 2001 with increasing urgency. By October, the drift had become a free fall.
On October 16, 2001, Enron announced a third-quarter earnings report that included a $1.2 billion reduction in shareholder equity, a number that appeared from the outside to materialize from nowhere, and triggered a wave of urgent questions from analysts, journalists, and institutional investors that Enron could no longer deflect with confident language and polished presentations. On October 22, the SEC opened a formal investigation. On October 24, Andrew Fastow was removed as CFO. Credit rating agencies began downgrading Enron's debt. Trading partners began demanding collateral. The mechanisms that had held the structure together started releasing all at once, like bolts shearing off a bridge under stress. On December 2, 2001, Enron Corporation filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in federal court in New York.
At the time of filing, it was the single largest corporate bankruptcy in American history, a distinction it would hold for less than a year before WorldCom surpassed it. 20,000 employees lost their jobs in the weeks that followed. Thousands of those same workers had spent years being encouraged, in some cases subtly pressured through corporate culture, to concentrate their 401k retirement savings in Enron stock. When the shares hit 90 cents, those accounts were essentially emptied. Men and women who had spent 20, 25, 30 years with the same company watched their entire retirement disappear in the span of a few weeks in late 2001. Meanwhile, company executives had collectively sold hundreds of millions of dollars in personal stock holdings during the preceding months, operating on information that the people whose savings they were destroying never had access to. Kenneth Lay was indicted in July 2004 on 11 counts of securities fraud and related charges. He died of a heart attack in Aspen, Colorado in July 2006 before his sentencing date, a fact that, under federal legal doctrine, caused his conviction to be vacated, a procedural outcome that felt to many observers like one final infuriating escape. Jeffrey Skilling was convicted on 19 counts of fraud, conspiracy, and insider trading, and sentenced to 24 years in federal prison. The sentence was later reduced to 14 years following a legal challenge, and he was released in February 2019. Andrew Fastow pleaded guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy, cooperated extensively with federal prosecutors, and served 6 years in a Louisiana federal prison.
Today, with a degree of irony that is almost too much to absorb, he travels to business schools and corporate conferences and gives paid lectures on corporate ethics, walking audiences through the precise mechanisms he invented to deceive them. Arthur Andersen is gone. Enron's physical headquarters in Houston was sold, rebranded, and now houses other businesses with different names and, presumably, different ambitions. The $68 billion in market value is permanently gone, dispersed into thin air and into the personal accounts of the people who knew it was coming. What Enron truly was, stripped of every legal argument and every impenetrable accounting footnote, was a machine built to manufacture the appearance of success. Not success itself, the appearance of it. A performance of prosperity funded by the gap between what was reported and what was real. And that gap was not created by a single villain working alone in a dark office. It was filled by a culture, a specific, deliberate, carefully maintained culture that promoted the people most willing to push past ethical limits, that rewarded the appearance of intelligence over demonstrable results, that punished expressed doubt and celebrated expressed certainty, regardless of what the underlying numbers actually showed, that hired genuinely brilliant people and then systematically channeled that brilliance toward the construction of illusions rather than the building of anything durable. The smartest guys in the room were smart enough to construct something that looked extraordinary. They were not quite wise enough to understand that illusions, no matter how sophisticated their architecture, no matter how many credentialed professionals have reviewed and approved them, always end the same way. The most dangerous company in any industry is never the one visibly losing money.
It is the one reporting extraordinary, almost inexplicable gains. The one where the numbers are always impressive, the leadership always confident, the stock always climbing, and the questions, somehow, always just slightly, politely, never quite fully answered. Because Enron didn't just fail, it succeeded at failing for years before anyone with the power to stop it chose to look directly at what was in front of them. And that is the part of this story that should stay with you long after this video ends. If this kind of corporate investigation is what you're here for, subscribing to Corporate Autopsy takes about 2 seconds, and the next collapse we examine might be even harder to believe than this one.